The third-person narrator speaks over a city skyline at dawn, the golden light casting long shadows across towering skyscrapers. Jonathan Miller stared at his laptop, his pulse racing. The numbers were not just low, they were catastrophic. Jonathan said, "This can't be real." His breath caught as he refreshed the page, each update sinking his heart further. Banks were freezing assets, investors were fleeing, and his company was collapsing before sunrise. Across the city, news tickers blared of a market meltdown. Sarah, his loyal friend and business partner, called frantically, her voice shaking. Sarah said, "Jonathan, tell me it's not true." Jonathan whispered, "Everything we built is gone." In a corner office miles away, Victor Kane, the powerful financier, smirked as he watched the chaos unfold. The world had changed in a single night, and Jonathan was at the center of a financial nightmare no one saw coming. The narrator explains how Jonathan's company, Miller Enterprises, had been a rising star in tech investments, fueled by bold risks and relentless ambition. Now, with a single market crash, it was on the verge of ruin. Jonathan said, "Everything we worked for, Sarah, it's all slipping away." Sarah sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly, tears in her eyes. Sarah said, "We can still fight this, Jonathan. There has to be a way." The silence between them was heavy, as the weight of their losses sank in. The city outside buzzed with rumors, investors calling non-stop. Jonathan's phone lit up with messages from partners demanding answers. He looked at Sarah and whispered, "If we can't find a solution by tonight, they'll tear us apart." The battle for survival had begun, and time was already running out. In a cramped downtown cafe, Sarah met with Mark, a trusted advisor and close friend. Mark, 36-year-old male Latino, sat with a furrowed brow, his coffee untouched. Sarah said, "Mark, it's worse than we thought." Mark leaned forward, voice low. Mark said, "If the creditors move fast, they'll own everything by morning." Sarah's heart pounded as she realized the gravity of their situation. The narrator described the cafe's chatter fading into a dull roar, as fear took hold. Sarah said, "Jonathan's on edge. He blames himself." Mark placed a hand on hers and said, "He's not the only one." Outside the window, flashing headlines displayed the market's chaos, a reminder of the storm they were trapped in. Victor Kane stood in his high-rise office, watching the chaos below. The narrator described the cold precision in Victor's movements as he adjusted his cufflinks. Victor said, "Everything is proceeding as planned." A subordinate entered, trembling. "Sir, Jonathan's team is fighting back," he stammered. Victor's lips curved into a dangerous smile. Victor said, "Let them fight. It will make their fall more dramatic." The city below reflected in his window like a battlefield. The narrator revealed that Victor had orchestrated the collapse, pulling strings behind the scenes for months. In Victor's mind, this wasn't just business, it was war. The narrator flashed back to 1 year earlier, showing Jonathan's company at its peak. Jonathan stood before a cheering crowd of employees, Sarah by his side, pride radiating from them both. Jonathan said, "This is only the beginning." The company was growing fast, investors flooding in, dreams taking shape. In the crowd, Mark clapped with genuine joy, while Victor watched from the back, expression unreadable. The narrator revealed that beneath the celebration, seeds of betrayal were already being sown. Sarah whispered to Jonathan, "We're really doing this, aren't we?" Jonathan smiled, unaware of the storm on the horizon. In that moment, they believed nothing could touch them. The narrator reflects on Jonathan Miller's journey, showing him alone in his office late at night. The dim desk lamp illuminated scattered reports and empty coffee cups. Jonathan had once been celebrated as a visionary. Now he sat in silence, his dreams crumbling. Jonathan whispered, "I should have seen this coming." His reflection in the darkened window stared back, hollow and tired. The narrator revealed Jonathan's upbringing, a small-town kid who built a company from nothing. Success had come fast, but it was built on fragile trust. Jonathan said, "I fought my way up, and now I'm fighting not to fall." His phone buzzed relentlessly with messages, he couldn't bear to read. The night stretched endlessly, heavy with regret and the haunting question of whether he had been betrayed or simply blind. Sarah arrived early the next morning, finding Jonathan still at his desk, eyes bloodshot and unshaven. Sarah said, "You didn't go home, did you?" Jonathan gave a weary shake of his head. Jonathan said, "Sleep feels like a luxury we can't afford." Sarah pulled up a chair, her voice steady but urgent. Sarah said, "We have to think strategically. There are still pieces we can salvage." Jonathan rubbed his temples, overwhelmed. Jonathan said, "Every call I get is another investor threatening to pull out." Sarah leaned closer, determination burning in her eyes. Sarah said, "Then we fight harder. We can't let Victor win." The narrator described how their bond had been forged through years of struggle, tested now like never before. Jonathan met with Edward Grant, a former financial guru turned mentor, in a secluded park. Edward, 60-year-old male, Caucasian, wore a weathered coat, his face lined with experience and regret. Edward said, "You look like a man carrying the weight of the world." Jonathan exhaled, shoulders slumping. Jonathan said, "Everything's falling apart, and I don't know who to trust." Edward's gaze hardened as he spoke. Edward said, "Trust no one, not in this game, especially not Victor Kane." The narrator revealed Edward's past, a man once powerful who had been destroyed by the very system he now warned Jonathan about. Jonathan said, "So what do I do?" Edward placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Survive first, fight later." Later that day, Jonathan sat across from Olivia Hart, a wealthy investor who had backed Miller Enterprises early on. Olivia, 45-year-old female, Asian American, exuded power and poise in a sleek designer suit. Olivia said, "Jonathan, I want to help, but I need assurances." Jonathan clenched his fists beneath the table, struggling to remain composed. Jonathan said, "Everything you've invested is still here. I just need more time." Olivia's expression didn't soften. Olivia said, "Time is money, and mine is running out." The narrator highlighted the tension between them, a dance of desperation and control. Olivia said, "Give me equity more than before, and I'll consider staying." Jonathan's stomach turned. He realized saving his company might mean surrendering his soul. Elsewhere, the narrator introduced Emily Carter, a young employee and innocent victim of the financial storm. Emily, 27-year-old female, Caucasian, sat in a modest apartment surrounded by unpaid bills. Her eyes were red from crying. Emily said, "I trusted them. I put everything into this." Her voice cracked as she clutched a family photo. The narrator explained how employees like Emily had invested not only their time, but also their savings into Miller Enterprises. She had believed in Jonathan's vision, unaware of the larger forces at play. Emily whispered, "How am I supposed to start over?" Outside, the city buzzed indifferently. For Jonathan and Victor, the fight was about power. For Emily, it was about survival. The narrator described the suffocating tension in Jonathan's office as daylight streamed through half-closed blinds. Jonathan stood over a pile of overdue notices and foreclosure warnings, his hands trembling. Jonathan said, "These numbers aren't real. They can't be." Sarah hovered near the window, her voice sharp with urgency. Sarah said, "They are real, Jonathan, and they're getting worse by the hour." The phones on Jonathan's desk rang relentlessly, a chorus of creditors demanding payment. The narrator revealed that Jonathan's personal assets were now on the line, his home, his future, even Sarah's savings. Jonathan whispered, "If I lose this company, I lose everything." The room seemed to shrink around them as the stakes became crushingly clear. Later, Jonathan faced a crowded boardroom filled with angry investors and advisors. The narrator described the room as oppressive, with a long polished table reflecting tense faces. Olivia sat at the head, her expression unreadable. Olivia said, "Jonathan, the losses are unsustainable. We need answers." Jonathan tried to steady his voice. Jonathan said, "We can recover if we hold our positions. Pulling out now guarantees ruin." A voice from the far end shouted, "You've already ruined us." The narrator highlighted the chaos as voices overlapped, accusations flying. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table, silencing the room. Jonathan said, "Give me 1 more week. I can fix this." His plea hung in the air, fragile and desperate. In a quiet parking garage, Sarah met with Lucas Wright, a whistleblower who worked inside Victor Kane's empire. Lucas, 32-year-old male Caucasian, looked around nervously before speaking. Lucas said, "Victor's been manipulating the market for months. Jonathan's downfall was engineered." Sarah's breath caught. Sarah said, "Do you have proof?" Lucas pulled a small flash drive from his pocket. Lucas said, "Everything you need is here. But if Victor finds out I gave this to you, I'm finished." The narrator described Sarah's fear and determination colliding as she took the drive. She whispered, "We'll protect you. This ends now." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. Victor Kane sat in his penthouse office, surrounded by glowing monitors, displaying plunging numbers and news feeds. The narrator described his calm demeanor as he read a report. A subordinate stood trembling nearby. Subordinate said, "Sir, there's chatter about a leak. Someone may have given Jonathan evidence." Victor's eyes narrowed, his voice cold as steel. Victor said, "Find out who, then erase them from this game." He turned back to the window, the city spread beneath him like a conquered kingdom. The narrator revealed Victor's plan to tighten his grip, not just on Jonathan's company, but on every investor connected to it. Victor smirked, whispering to himself, "Desperation makes men predictable." Back at the office, Sarah revealed Lucas's evidence to Jonathan. The narrator described Jonathan's face as he scrolled through damning documents, each file a nail in the coffin of his trust. Jonathan said, "Victor set me up. Every deal, every loss. Orchestrated." Sarah clenched her fists, rage burning in her voice. Sarah said, "We can expose him, Jonathan. This is our chance to fight back." Jonathan's hands trembled as he closed the laptop. Jonathan said, "If we go public with this, Victor will destroy us before we even try." Their argument grew heated, fear and anger spilling over. The narrator captured the moment as their partnership teetered between unity and collapse, setting the stage for the storm to come. The narrator described Sarah returning to the dark, echoing parking garage where she had met Lucas before. She found him pacing nervously, sweat glistening on his brow. Lucas said, "Victor's tightening security. If he suspects me, I'm dead." Sarah gripped his arm firmly, whispering, "Stay calm, Lucas. Did you find anything else?" Lucas nodded and handed her a folder stuffed with printed documents. Lucas said, "These show offshore accounts, all linked to Victor. He's laundering the money he stole from your investors." Sarah's heart pounded as she flipped through the pages, each one revealing the scale of Victor's corruption. The narrator emphasized the weight of the discovery. Sarah whispered, "This is enough to bring him down, if we survive long enough to use it." Jonathan met Edward in a secluded diner on the city's outskirts. The narrator described the rain beating against fogged windows as Edward stirred his coffee with trembling hands. Edward said, "I've been where you are, Jonathan. Victor destroyed me the same way." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Jonathan said, "You knew what he was capable of, and you didn't warn me?" Edward's voice cracked with regret. Edward said, "I thought I could save you, but I was wrong." The narrator revealed Edward's tragic past. Once a powerful hedge fund manager, he lost everything to Victor's manipulations. Jonathan leaned forward, fists clenched. Jonathan said, "Then help me stop him, before he ruins more lives." Edward nodded slowly, haunted by memories of his own downfall. At Victor's penthouse, the narrator described a chilling scene. Victor stood before his monitors, reading a report with a satisfied smile. Olivia entered, her face unreadable. Victor said, "Jonathan's finished. By tomorrow his company will be mine." Olivia crossed her arms, her voice sharp. Olivia said, "And what about the others who trusted you?" Victor chuckled darkly. Victor said, "Trust is a tool, Olivia, nothing more." The narrator revealed Olivia's internal struggle. She had backed Jonathan once, but her greed aligned her with Victor. She whispered, almost to herself, "This isn't what I signed up for." Victor turned sharply, eyes like daggers. Victor said, "You signed up to win. Don't forget that." Back at Miller Enterprises, Jonathan pieced together Sarah's evidence and Edward's warnings. The narrator described his growing horror as the puzzle formed a clear picture. Jonathan said, "It wasn't bad luck, it was Victor. He planned every loss." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. Sarah said, "And Olivia helped him. She fed him insider information." Jonathan's face fell as he realized the full betrayal. Jonathan said, "She was supposed to be our ally." The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of city traffic. Jonathan slammed his fist on the desk. Jonathan said, "This isn't just business. It's war." The narrator captured his shift from desperation to resolve, marking the moment Jonathan became a fighter. As Jonathan and Sarah prepared to act, chaos erupted. The narrator described a sudden power outage plunging the office into darkness. Sarah gasped, "What's happening?" Jonathan grabbed a flashlight, revealing shattered glass near the window. A shadow moved outside. Jonathan said, "Victor's making his move." Footsteps thundered in the hallway, growing closer. Sarah whispered, "He's coming for us." The narrator heightened the tension as Jonathan realized Victor wasn't just fighting for money. He was willing to destroy anyone in his way. Jonathan's voice hardened. Jonathan said, "Then we fight back, starting now." The scene ended with the sound of a door being kicked open. The narrator described Jonathan pacing his dark office as dawn's first light seeped through cracked blinds. The chaos from the night before still lingered, broken glass glinting on the floor. Jonathan said, "Victor thinks he's won. But this isn't over." Sarah watched him silently, arms crossed, her face etched with worry. Sarah said, "We can't take him head on, he's too powerful." Jonathan stopped pacing, a fire in his eyes. Jonathan said, "Then we outsmart him. Lucas's files are our weapon." The narrator revealed Jonathan's plan, to use Victor's own financial network against him, exposing the fraud while reclaiming control of Miller Enterprises. Sarah whispered, "It's a dangerous play." Jonathan responded, his voice steady, "It's our only play." The narrator described a tense meeting in a private club, where Jonathan faced Olivia across a small table. Olivia's expression was icy calm, a predator assessing prey. Olivia said, "You've lost everything, Jonathan. Why are you here?" Jonathan leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. Jonathan said, "Because you haven't won yet." Olivia smirked, sipping her wine. Olivia said, "Victor controls the market, and by extension you." Jonathan slid a single document toward her, proof of Victor's offshore accounts. Olivia's smirk faltered. Jonathan said, "Help me bring him down, or when this goes public, you'll go down with him." The narrator captured Olivia's inner conflict as her loyalty wavered under the weight of self-preservation. Meanwhile, Emily sat at a crowded unemployment office, clutching a folder of her financial documents. The narrator revealed her despair as she overheard others discussing Miller Enterprises' collapse. A woman beside her whispered, "We all trusted them." Emily said softly, "So did I." The narrator described how Emily's initial hopelessness shifted into resolve as she spotted a news alert about Jonathan's upcoming announcement. Emily whispered to herself, "If he's really fighting back, maybe there's still a chance." The moment marked her transformation from victim to someone ready to take action. She stood, determination replacing tears, ready to confront the system that had crushed her. Jonathan's plan moved forward that night. The narrator described multiple monitors glowing in a secret location as Sarah and Lucas worked furiously to execute a digital strike. Lucas said, "Once we hit send, there's no going back." Jonathan stood behind them, watching the screens. Jonathan said, "Do it." The files uploaded, revealing Victor's crimes to regulators and the press in real time. The narrator heightened the tension as Victor's empire began to unravel before their eyes. Sarah gasped, "It's working. The accounts are freezing." Jonathan's jaw tightened. Jonathan said, Now we take the final step, reclaiming our company. Outside, sirens wailed as chaos spread through the city's financial district. As dawn broke, Jonathan and Sarah stood on the balcony of Miller Enterprises, preparing for the public announcement. The narrator described the weight of the moment as cameras and reporters gathered below. Sarah said, "This could save us, or destroy us completely." Jonathan looked over the city, taking a deep breath. Jonathan said, "Victor took everything from me, but he won't take our future." The crowd erupted with questions as Jonathan stepped forward. His voice was steady, defiant. Jonathan said, "Today the truth comes out." The narrator left the outcome uncertain, the tension hanging like a storm about to break. The narrator described the tense silence in the Miller Enterprises boardroom, now filled with reporters, investors, and employees. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, Sarah at his side, facing Victor and Olivia. Jonathan's voice cut through the murmurs. Jonathan said, "It ends today, Victor." Victor smirked, calm and cold. Victor said, "You think one stunt can erase your failures? You're finished, Jonathan." Olivia's eyes darted nervously between them, torn by guilt. Jonathan slammed a stack of documents onto the table. Jonathan said, "This isn't a stunt. It's proof of everything you've done. The laundering, the fraud, the lies." The room erupted in gasps. The narrator revealed that the entire confrontation was being live-streamed to the public, Victor's empire crumbling under the world's gaze. The narrator described chaos erupting as Victor's lawyers stormed into the room, shouting objections. Jonathan raised his voice above the din. Jonathan said, "Victor's accounts are frozen. Your empire is collapsing in real time." Victor rose to his feet, his calm demeanor finally cracking. Victor shouted, "You think you've won? You're nothing without me." Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm and steady. Sarah said, "No, Victor. He built this company without you, and now we'll rebuild it without your poison." The narrator captured the shift in power as Jonathan stood tall, while Victor, for the first time, looked cornered. The financial war had become personal, and only one of them would walk away unbroken. The narrator shifted to Emily, who stood outside the building among a crowd of former employees and investors, watching the live stream on a giant outdoor screen. Emily's hands shook as she held her phone, tears welling in her eyes. Emily whispered, "He's fighting for us." The crowd erupted in anger as Victor's crimes were revealed. A man shouted, "He stole our futures." Emily turned to those around her, her voice gaining strength. Emily said, "We can take it back, together." The narrator revealed how Emily's transformation was now complete. She was no longer a victim but a leader, inspiring those harmed by Victor's greed to demand justice. Inside the boardroom, Victor's desperation turned dangerous. The narrator described him lunging toward Jonathan, knocking the stack of evidence to the floor. Victor growled, "If I go down, I'm taking you with me." Sarah screamed as security guards rushed in, restraining Victor. Jonathan knelt to gather the scattered documents, his hands steady despite the chaos. Jonathan said, "This ends with the truth, not violence." Olivia, shaken, finally stepped forward. Olivia said, "He's right. Victor has been manipulating us all. I'll testify." The narrator revealed how Olivia's confession sealed Victor's fate. For the first time, Victor's arrogance cracked completely, his power stripped away. The narrator described the final moments as the live stream ended, and the crowd outside erupted into cheers. Jonathan stood by the window, breathing heavily, the weight of victory sinking in. Sarah touched his shoulder gently. Sarah said, "It's over. You did it." Jonathan's eyes were distant, his voice low. Jonathan said, "We stopped Victor, but at what cost?" Outside, Emily led the crowd in a chant for justice, her voice echoing through the streets. The narrator revealed that Jonathan's fight had saved many, but left deep scars that would never fully heal. Jonathan whispered, almost to himself, "The truth always has a price." The scene faded with his reflection in the glass, half in light, half in shadow. The narrator described the silent boardroom, now cleared of chaos, sunlight streaming through tall windows. Jonathan sat alone at the head of the table, papers neatly stacked before him. The room, once a battlefield, now felt like a tomb. Jonathan said softly, "It's over, but it doesn't feel like victory." He ran a hand over his face, exhaustion settling in. Sarah entered quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. Sarah said, "The company is yours again, Jonathan. We saved it." Jonathan looked up, his voice tinged with sorrow. Jonathan said, "We saved the company, but not everyone." The narrator revealed Jonathan's conflicting emotions. Triumph weighed down by guilt for those who suffered during the war. Outside, distant cheers reminded him of what was gained and what was lost. The narrator shifted to Emily's small apartment, where she packed a worn suitcase. Bills still littered the table, but now there was hope in her movements. Emily said quietly, "This isn't the end. It's a new beginning." She glanced at her family photo, determination replacing despair. The news played softly on her TV, showing Victor's arrest and Jonathan's speech. The reporter's voice declared, "Miller Enterprises has been restored under new leadership." Emily whispered, "Maybe there's still a future for us after all." She zipped her suitcase, ready to leave the past behind. The narrator described Emily's transformation, from victim of greed to survivor ready to rebuild her life. The narrator described Sarah and Jonathan standing together on the roof of the Miller Enterprises building, watching the sunrise. Sarah broke the silence, her voice soft but firm. Sarah said, "We made it through, but we'll never be the same." Jonathan nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. Jonathan said, "I couldn't have done it without you." Sarah's expression was bittersweet. Sarah said, "You don't have to do everything alone anymore." The narrator revealed that their bond had deepened through hardship, though unspoken questions lingered between them. As the sun rose higher, Jonathan whispered, "This is a new day, Sarah. Let's make it count." Later that morning, Jonathan visited Edward at a quiet cemetery. The narrator revealed Edward's frailty as he stood near a weathered gravestone. Jonathan said, "You gave me the strength to fight, Edward. I owe you everything." Edward's voice trembled with emotion. "Huh?" Edward said, "No, Jonathan, you owe me nothing. Just promise me you'll never become like Victor." Jonathan nodded, understanding the warning beneath the words. Edward placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder, a final gesture of mentorship. Edward said, "Go build something better." The narrator described Jonathan walking away with renewed resolve, leaving Edward alone among the silent gravestones, a relic of past battles fought and lost. The narrator described Jonathan standing alone in his office at twilight, the city lights flickering like distant stars. The room was rebuilt, neat and pristine, yet the memories of chaos lingered. Jonathan whispered, "Everything has a price." He stared at a photo of the company's early days, Sarah, Mark, and the others smiling, unaware of what was to come. Outside, faint cheers echoed as people celebrated Victor's downfall. Jonathan closed his eyes, breathing deeply, then turned off the light. The narrator left the final image haunting and unresolved, suggesting that while Victor had been defeated, the scars of greed and ambition would never fully fade.